They made me scrub toilets in front of laughing recruits. One slapped my hand when I reached for coffee meant for real officers. Another screamed so close to my face I could smell his breakfast. They had no idea the woman they humiliated was about to become their commanding officer. This is my story. Before we dive in, if you love stories about karma and justice, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me what you'd do in my position, and subscribe so you never miss these intense true stories. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. My name is Thea Brennan, and 16 years ago I put on this uniform for the first time. 16 years of service, of sacrifice, of climbing through ranks that didn't want women like me. I earned every promotion, every medal, every ounce of respect. Major Thea Brennan. That title meant something. It meant I'd survived when others tried to break me. It meant I had power, authority, a voice that made rooms go quiet when I entered. But 2 weeks ago, I stripped all of that away. Standing in my apartment the night before, I stared at my dress uniform hanging in the closet, the gold oak leaf insignia catching the light. 16 years of my life represented in metal and fabric. General Paxton's voice echoed in my head from our classified meeting earlier that day. "We're getting reports from Fort Ashford, Major. Toxic leadership, abuse of junior enlisted. But reports aren't enough. We need someone on the inside, someone who can see what really happens when rank thinks no one's watching." He'd looked at me with those steel gray eyes. "I need you to become invisible for 2 weeks, strip your rank, become a cadet again, the lowest position on that base. Can you do that?" I'd said yes without hesitation. But now, alone in my apartment, peeling off my major's insignia, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade. Vulnerability. I was about to become nobody, no authority, no protection, just another cadet in a sea of uniforms. The morning I arrived at Fort Ashford, the sun was barely breaking the horizon. The base was already alive with movement, with purpose, with the organized chaos of military life. I walked through those gates carrying a single duffel bag, wearing plain fatigues with empty shoulders where my rank should be. No one saluted, no one noticed. I was invisible before I'd even started. The administrative office smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A bored corporal handed me a temporary ID without looking up. "Cadet T. Brennan," he muttered, sliding the laminated card across the desk. Not major, not officer, just cadet. I stared at that ID for longer than I should have. This was my identity now. This was my cover. They assigned me to the junior barracks, handed me a duty roster filled with the jobs no one else wanted: kitchen detail, equipment inventory, latrine cleaning, the unglamorous, invisible work that keeps a military base running. I told myself it was just 2 weeks, 14 days of observation, of documentation, of seeing what really happened when power went unchecked. I could handle anything for 14 days. But as I walked toward the barracks that first morning, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I felt the weight of what I'd agreed to. I was about to experience powerlessness again. I was about to remember what it felt like to be at the bottom, looking up at people who thought their rank made them gods. I had no idea just how brutal those gods could be, or how satisfying it would feel to watch them fall. The humiliation started on day 2, in the officers' mess hall during breakfast. I'd been up since 4 in the morning running drills with the other junior enlisted, my legs burning, my stomach growling so loud I thought everyone could hear it. The mess hall was packed, maybe 60 or 70 people, the sound of trays clattering and conversations buzzing filling the air. I grabbed my breakfast and scanned the room for an empty seat. My exhausted brain didn't register the small sign on the table until I'd already sat down. "Excuse me? Excuse me?" The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Lieutenant Calloway stood 3 feet away, his face twisted in disbelief. The entire hall went silent. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I felt my face start to burn. "What do you think you're doing, Cadet?" I looked down at the small placard I'd missed. "Officers only." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "I apologize, sir. I didn't see the designation. I'll move." Before I could stand, another voice joined in. Lieutenant Rowan Hart walked over slowly, deliberately, her boots clicking against the floor with each step. "Can you read, Cadet?" Or did they lower standards that much? Her smile was cold, calculated, designed to humiliate. Other officers were watching now, some smirking, some looking away uncomfortably. Then Captain Bridger Knox approached. He was older, maybe 40, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He reached down and grabbed my tray before I could react, walked it directly to the trash bin, and dumped my entire breakfast into the garbage while the whole room watched in silence. "Cadets eat after we're done," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If there's anything left, now get out before I have you doing push-ups until you vomit." I stood up, my hands shaking, my face on fire. As I walked toward the exit, I heard the laughter start. Not loud, not overt, but there. A ripple of amusement at my expense. The doors closed behind me, and I stood in the empty hallway, my stomach still growling, my pride shattered. I memorized their faces, every single one. But that was just the beginning. 4 days in, I was delivering an equipment inventory report to the officers' break room. I'd been on my feet for 7 hours straight without food. When I finished my report, I saw the coffee pot on the counter. Just coffee. Something to get me through the rest of the day. I reached for an empty cup. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. Lieutenant Calloway's hand cracked against mine, the sound echoing in the small room. My hand stung, immediately turning red. "That's for officers, Cadet. What part of hierarchy don't you understand?" Rowan Hart laughed from her position in the corner. Actually laughed. "Maybe she's too stupid to understand basic rank structure. Should we draw her a picture?" Other officers in the room snickered. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to make me feel completely alone. Captain Knox didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Get out, and if I see you reaching above your station again, you'll be cleaning latrines with your toothbrush." I left that room with my hand still stinging, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt. It was the casual cruelty of it. The ease with which they dehumanized someone they thought was beneath them. This wasn't about coffee or seating arrangements. This was about power and their desperate need to wield it over anyone who couldn't fight back. They had no idea who I really was, and that mistake would cost them everything. By day 7, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I was wrong. That morning, I was assigned to deep clean the barracks bathrooms. Standard duty, nothing unusual. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing toilets, when I heard boots approaching. Multiple pairs. Captain Knox walked in with 3 other junior officers, and I knew immediately something was wrong. The look on his face told me everything. "Unacceptable," he announced, loud enough for his voice to carry down the hallway. "Completely unacceptable work, Cadet Brennan." He made me scrub the same toilet 5 times. 5 times on my hands and knees while he watched, arms crossed, satisfaction radiating from him. But that wasn't enough for him. He called in recruits, 15, maybe 20 junior enlisted, forced to stand there and watch my humiliation. "This is what happens when you don't meet expectations," Knox's voice boomed through the bathroom. "Take a good look." Rowan Hart stood in the doorway with her phone out, taking photos, showing them to other officers who laughed. Actually laughed while I scrubbed that toilet with the cleaning solution burning my hands and my knees aching against the tile floor. I could see one young recruit, couldn't have been more than 19, looking uncomfortable. But he said nothing. No one said anything. I came so close to breaking in that moment. So close to standing up, ripping off this charade, and screaming my real rank in their faces. But then I looked at those junior recruits, saw the fear in their eyes, the resignation. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was what they lived with every single day. This toxic culture of humiliation and abuse. That's why I was here. That's why I had to see it through. 10 days in, they pulled me out of formation during a base-wide inspection. 200 people standing at attention, and Captain Knox walked the line until he found me. A button on my uniform was loose, just one button, slightly askew. I'd discover later that someone had sabotaged it the night before. But in that moment, all I knew was his rage. He pulled me out in front of everyone, screamed in my face so close I could smell his breakfast, could feel the heat of his anger. Are you disrespecting this uniform? Are you? Spit flew from his mouth. He made me drop and do 100 push-ups right there on the parade ground while the entire base watched. My arms were shaking by number 50. At number 75, he put his boot on my back, adding his weight. If you can't maintain standards, maybe you don't belong in uniform at all. His voice carried across the entire formation. Rowan Hart and Calloway stood nearby, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Other senior officers looked away. That complicit silence hurt almost as much as the physical pain, but I kept counting. 80, 90, 100. When I finally stood back up, my arms were trembling, my face was covered in sweat and dirt, and my rage was a living thing inside my chest. 4 more days, I told myself. Just 4 more days, and they would understand what accountability really meant. That night, I met with General Paxton in his private office. I laid out everything I'd documented, every abuse, every humiliation, every witness. His face grew harder with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said the words I'd been waiting to hear. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, Major Brennan. The change of command ceremony is in 3 days. The countdown had begun. On the morning of day 14, they tried one last time to put me in my place. I was delivering morning reports to the officers' briefing room, and the moment Captain Knox saw me, his face twisted with that familiar contempt. "Why are you still here, Cadet?" Rowan Hart joined in, her voice dripping with disdain. "I thought we made it clear where you belong." Lieutenant Calloway laughed. "Some people never learn." They mocked me in front of 12 other officers. Knox stepped closer, towering over me. "What's it going to take? Should we demote you to latrine duty permanently?" Hart smiled that cold smile. Or maybe she should just quit, save everyone the trouble. I stood there at attention, silent, letting them have their moment. They mistook my silence for defeat. "Finally learning your place," Knox muttered. "Good." They had no idea that in 90 minutes their entire world would collapse. At 9 o'clock sharp, the entire base assembled on the main parade ground, 500 personnel in formation, the morning sun casting long shadows across the concrete. It was announced as a mandatory ceremony, something special. I watched from my position in the back with the other junior enlisted as Knox, Hart, and Calloway stood prominently with the senior officers. Hart leaned over to Calloway, whispering something that made him smirk. Probably assuming it was just another boring promotion ceremony, another chance to feel superior. General Paxton took the podium, and the entire base fell silent. "Today marks an important transition for Fort Ashford," he began, his voice carrying across the formation. "For the past 2 weeks, we've conducted a leadership assessment." I saw confusion ripple through the officer ranks. Knox and Hart exchanged glances. This assessment was conducted by a senior officer operating undercover as a junior cadet. The confusion turned to nervous energy. Officers were looking at each other, trying to figure out who it could be. Calloway's smirk had vanished. Knox's jaw was tight. This officer observed leadership quality, treatment of junior personnel, and adherence to our core values, the general continued. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over everyone. "I'd like to introduce your new base commander, Major Thea Brennan." I stepped forward from the back of the formation. Every eye turned toward me as I walked through the ranks, the crowd parting like water. Each step felt powerful, deliberate, like I was reclaiming every ounce of dignity they'd tried to strip away. I passed directly by Knox, Hart, and Calloway. The color drained from their faces. Knox's mouth literally fell open. Hart's hand was trembling. Calloway looked like he might be sick right there on the parade ground. I reached the podium and received the salute from General Paxton. Then I turned to face the formation, and I made direct eye contact with the 3 people who'd made my life hell for 2 weeks. "For 2 weeks I was Cadet Brennan," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I scrubbed toilets. I was screamed at. I was humiliated publicly. My hand was slapped away from coffee. I was called stupid, inadequate, unworthy." I let those words hang in the air before continuing. "Some of you watching knew this was happening, some of you participated, and some of you were the victims of the same treatment day after day. I looked at the junior enlisted, saw hope flickering in their eyes. To those who've endured this toxic culture, I saw you. I felt what you feel, and it ends today. Then I delivered the words they'd been dreading. Captain Bridger Knox, Lieutenant Rowan Hart, Lieutenant Calloway. Step forward. They hesitated. For a moment I thought Knox might actually refuse the order, but military discipline runs deep. They stepped forward, their boots heavy on the concrete, their faces drained of all color. Hart's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back. Calloway couldn't meet my eyes. Knox tried to maintain some semblance of dignity, but I could see the fear radiating from him. "You are hereby relieved of duty pending formal investigation," I announced, my voice carrying across the silent parade ground. "Charges include abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming, creating a hostile environment, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice Articles 92 and 134. Military police stepped forward from the formation. The sound of their approach seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Knox finally found his voice. "Major, we didn't—" But I cut him off before he could finish whatever excuse he was preparing. "Save it for the inquiry board, Captain." The words came out cold, final. There would be no redemption here, no last-minute explanations. They were escorted away in front of 500 witnesses. Rowan Hart was crying, tears streaming down her face as reality crashed over her. Calloway looked back once, just once, and I made sure my expression showed him exactly what I thought of his cruelty. But removing 3 toxic leaders wasn't enough. I spent the next 10 minutes outlining sweeping changes, an open-door policy for all ranks, immediate review of leadership practices across the entire base, an anonymous reporting system so that victims of abuse could come forward without fear of retaliation, mandatory leadership retraining for every single officer. "This base will be a model for how we treat our people," I said, looking directly at the remaining officers, "or you won't be here to see it." 3 months later, Fort Ashford was unrecognizable. The tribunal had concluded swiftly. Knox, Hart, and Calloway were dishonorably discharged, their military careers destroyed, their pensions revoked. 6 other officers were disciplined or removed for their complicit silence. But more importantly, the culture had shifted. Junior enlisted moved through the base with confidence now, with dignity. Officers treated them with respect, not because they feared punishment, but because we'd rebuilt the foundation of what leadership actually meant. One afternoon, there was a knock on my office door. A young private stood there, nervous, her hand still raised from knocking. I recognized her immediately. She'd been one of the recruits forced to watch my humiliation in that bathroom. Private Jessa Vance, barely 21 years old, with bright eyes that had seen too much darkness too soon. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. She told me her story, how she'd almost quit after watching the toxic leadership, how seeing what I endured while staying silent had given her hope. "You could have revealed who you were any time. But you finished the mission. You showed us that someone would finally hold them accountable." I felt something crack inside me, that wall I'd built to survive those 2 weeks. "They needed to show their true nature completely," I told her, "and you needed to see that abuse of power doesn't last forever." She saluted, tears in her eyes, and promised she'd become the kind of leader I was. After she left, I stood at my window, watching the base move with purpose and respect. People ask me if those 2 weeks were worth it, worth the humiliation, the pain, the rage burning inside me. And my answer is always the same, every single second. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about breaking a cycle of abuse that had gone unchecked for too long. They thought they were teaching me my place. Instead, I showed them theirs. Knox, Hart, and Calloway learned that leadership isn't about the rank on your collar, it's about what you do when you have power over others. They failed that test spectacularly, and now they'll carry that failure for the rest of their lives. But for me, and for every junior enlisted person on that base, we learned something different. We learned that dignity can't be taken away by someone else's cruelty. We learned that accountability, real accountability, is possible. And we learned that sometimes you have to become powerless to understand how powerful you really are. Never underestimate the person you're looking down on. They might be looking down at you from a height you can't even imagine. If this story moved you, hit that like button and turn it red. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever witnessed toxic leadership? Share your story below because this community needs to hear it. And subscribe with notifications on because I share real stories of justice, karma, and courage every single week. Remember, dignity isn't given by rank, it's earned by character. I'll see you in the next one.